In this video, I'm going to create my own Mellotron-inspired samples recorded from tape. This is a Mellotron. The Mellotron is an electro-mechanical musical instrument developed in Birmingham, England in 1963. With the press of each key, a separate section of tape is played. There have been a handful of versions and revisions of the Mellotron, with the latest being in 2007 with the M4000. It's an instrument that changed how music was played. The Mellotron has become such an iconic sound, and it got me thinking, how would it sound if I recorded my own sounds to tape and try to use these sounds in a Mellotron emulation plugin or sampler? In this video, I'll be creating the tape samples in the analog domain using hardware, vintage synthesizers, recording to tape, and then chopping up those samples to create a multi-sampled instrument. There's already Mellotron VSTs out there, but I'm after the tone of the samples themselves. So, let me walk you through the process. So for this, I'm going to be sending MIDI out to all of the synthesizers to trigger each note at the same time chromatically. So for synths, I'm going to be using the Roland Juno 6D, the Moog Sub Fatty, the Sequential Prophet Rev 2, and the Yamaha DX7. So with that group of instruments, I have some onboard effects on the Prophet Rev 2 and then the chorus on the Juno 60. In addition to that, I'll be using a Dan Electro Spring King for real spring reverb to add some modulation and drip. And then I'll be going into the FMR Really Nice compressor. From the FMR Really Nice compressor, I'll be going into the Akai 4000 DS Mark II reel-to-reel tape machine. And then into the FMR Really Nice leveling amplifier to just bring the signal back up and just clean if there's any peaks. And then back into the box where I'm going to be chopping up the samples and loading them into the sampler. Yeah, so for sample playback, I have a lot of options. I could use the Nord sample editor and put them on my Nord Electro. I could put them chromatically on my MPC 1000. I could use something like Kontakt and make a Kontakt instrument. I could use plenty of Arturia samplers. I could use the Arturia Mellotron to load the samples in. And I could 3 hours later. So, for sake of simplicity, I'm going to use Pro Tools stock plugin, structure-free for sampling, and Arturia's emulation of the Mellotron. So first I started by sequencing the MIDI notes chromatically, and you can see that I'm playing with the velocity here. On most synthesizers, you have a keyboard tracking amount, so I kind of doing this since each note's going to be stacked together. I wanted to have my own custom shape to it with the 4 different layers. So I noticed that some of the notes were brighter as I went up the key bed as well, but I liked how the synth was programmed, so I wanted to just kind of automate this velocity. After checking all the MIDI, I moved on to recording. So one of my favorite things about Pro Tools is the process for comping in it. So you can see here that I'm setting slice at transients, so I can separate each clip on the actual grid, on the bar. So I can set the tempo so each whole note is a bar, and it makes it a lot easier to slice each note and then automate my fades. So this is tape sound 1. First, let's start with the Moog Sub Fatty. Next, the DX7. The Sequential Prophet Rev 2. And then lastly, we have the Roland Juno 60. So here's the sound all together to create the patch. So let's import this first sound into the sampler just to kind of get a feel for it before we use it in a composition or anything to see how it works. If you look in the top left corner, you'll see my MIDI input, which will be displaying the chords that are playing. This first sound, I wanted to use it primarily for my main key sound, and I think it works really well for that. So let's move on to the second sound and start with the Moog sub-fatty. And now the Yamaha DX7 sounds soloed. And now the Prophet Rev 2. And now the Juno 60. And now let's hear them all together. So I've loaded it into a sampler. Let's see how it sounds all together, playing some chords. So the second tape patch, I'm going for a full CS80 split patch sound. Something to contrast the key sounds for a later composition that have just a little more lushness to everything. Now on to the third tape sound, more of a brassy bass. The Roland Juno 60. The sequential Prophet Rev 2. The Yamaha DX7. The Moog sub-fatty. The Dan Electro Spring King reverb. And now all together. So after all that, let's hear these sounds in the sampler. To have more of a Mellotron experience, I took the layered one-shots and loaded them into Arturia's Mellotron emulation. I reached for the middle C note so it's easily trackable across the keybed so I don't need to transpose anything. So let's hear how it sounds in this sampler. So another interesting use for these samples is taking some of the one-shots or the layered sounds and then using them in conjunction with a VST or another sound. So here I'm layering them with piano and it's kind of acting as like a choir underneath the sound, an eerie digital analog hybrid, beautiful expressive pad sound. Thank you for watching. I know everyone doesn't have all the tools I'm using, the synthesizers, the tape machines, so keep an eye out for number 2, where I'll do the same process but completely in the box.